videotaping issue. Anyone sitting anywhere near that little camera in the back, which is videotaping this, please refrain from speaking loud or talking to your neighbor, because we'd like to pick up the sound up here and not necessarily your conversation about lunch. So thank you. I'll start with that little public service announcement. By the way, my name is Brad Caskey. I'm the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at Birmingham-Southern College, and it's really my distinct pleasure to welcome you here to today's Provost Forum. Today's speaker, Dr. Lamia Benyoussef, is an assistant professor in Arabic who joined the faculty recently, 2015. Credentials of BA from University de Centre and an MA and PhD from Michigan State University. Some of her interests include post-coloniality. Thank you, I got my word for the day. Post-coloniality, feminist theory and African literature, particularly emphasis on Islamic studies and the Arabic and French literature of the Maghreb. Today's presentation, provocative presentation, is Islamic Studies and the Gendered Politics of Translation, the case of Olaf Youssef. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Benyoussef to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very thrilled to be here. It's such an honor to speak at BSc Provost Forum. I would like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Timothy Smith and Ms. Erica Brown, for suggesting that I share my scholarship with you last year. I also extend my thanks to Ms. Melinda Thompson and Dr. Susan Haight, who gave me a hand last year during the complicated publication process. Thank you all. Let me start by introducing Olaf Youssef. First of all, there is no family relationship. Benyoussef and Youssef are two different family names. However, we do have a personal connection. We studied in the same undergraduate school, École Normale Sup of Tunisia, which is part of the French École Normale Supérieure, and so it's a special school that that focuses on teaching. We were the same age, but she was 3 years ahead of me because she was a child prodigy. She was the child prodigy of Tunisia. Everybody admired her, and I continue to admire her work ever since I met her as an undergrad. And for me, this translation is that I had to do that because I'm a big admirer of her scholarship. So the first picture is this one. Is the original Arabic book that came out in 2007. This is Olaf Youssef. And this is the recent translation that came out last year with Lexington Books Press. And on top, I chose the Arabic, that Arabic line means only God knows its interpretation. And it is the first page of the book in Arabic, but I thought that's the most important line, and it is from the Quran, and I'm going to explain later why I put it on in the first page of the book, the cover of the book, actually. I'm going to talk first about how I came to work on Olaf Youssef, and then I'm going to cover the book content and methodology. Then the gendered politics of translation. I'll be talking about my own journey as a translator, and then some conclusions about the importance of translation in political engagement. The first time I actually thought about translating this book was in 2011 when I was invited to a conference to Michigan State and the University of Michigan Ann Arbor, which was about African cultural production. And one of the problems we had is the lack of dialogue between sub-Saharan African scholars and North African scholars, because everything we know about each other comes either through French or through English. So somebody asked me, what's new in Tunisia? And I said, the new school of Islamic psychoanalytic feminism. And they said, we never heard of it. Of course, because nobody is translating. And so that was the first time I thought about translating this book. It took me about 3 years, and 3 years to find a publisher. So this is how I came into I'm going to go now to my second part of my talk, which is who is Olfa Yousef. On December 12, 2015, 2 days after the Tunisian quartet had received the Nobel Peace Award in Oslo, a judge in the holy city of Qayrawan condemned 6 young Tunisian male students to 3 years in prison and 5 years of banishment from Islam's first city in Africa for the crime of homosexuality. And this after submitting these young men to an annual examination to prove they were guilty of sodomy. This event created an uproar in Tunisian civil society for several reasons. First, forcible anal exams are recognized as torture, according to the United Nations Committee Against Torture. Second, the verdict was based on Article 230 of the Tunisian Penal Code, which criminalizes same-sex relationships, but such an article is now believed to be obsolete under the 2014 new constitution. And 3, the rule itself banishing somebody from a city derives from an old Bailiwick decree that used to apply to criminals convicted of murder, not homosexuality. In response to this new controversy, Yousef wrote on her Facebook page and in Tunisian dialect the following comment. In Tunisia, there is a Nobel Peace Award and also a young man who gets arrested for same-sex or heterosexual relations even outside wedlock. He's also arrested for putting on his personal computer videos or pictures with a sexual content. He cannot get married either because of unemployment and the high cost of living. And if he smokes a joint to forget about his misery, he gets arrested. And after this, you wonder why the youth are exploding themselves in Syria and Iraq? End quote. The mobilization of Tunisian civil society in defense of these 6 young students and the state registration of Shams as the first LGBT rights organization in Tunisia on May 10, 2015 would not have occurred without Yousef's groundbreaking book in Islamic gay studies, which not only granted Tunisians at home within the house of Islam, but also energized an important segment of the heterosexual population to openly support and defend LGBT rights on the street, social media, and national TV. Despite this huge success for a woman scholar, her work has never been translated into English, which is a gap that begs to be bridged, given the relevance of Yousef's work for gay Muslim youth worldwide, for gender studies in particular, and for Islamic studies in general. In summer 2017, the Tunisian government has abolished a 1973 law which prevents Tunisian women from marrying outside their faith. It is also thanks to Olfa Yousef and that law came into about, that repeal came into about. Recently, the government has also created a new commission that would revise gender inequity in inheritance, which Tunisian activists, feminists, men and women have been fighting for a long time to repeal because we see it as a form of economic violence against women. Although Olfa Yousef is not the first one to have talked about the need to abolish gender discrimination in inheritance. Actually, it goes back to the father of Tunisian feminism, Taher Haddad, in 1930, who wrote a book where he called for the end of polygamy, for the end of seclusion, for the end of gender discrimination in inheritance. It was actually her book which made that issue a popular issue in the media, in the social media, on TV. Before Olfa Yousef's Hayratu Muslima that I have translated, it was not a public issue, only scholarly, it was just a scholarly debate. It is my general argument in this presentation that the reluctance to translate Yousef's seminal work into English is part of a long patriarchal tradition which refuses to recognize the contributions of the Muslim gendered subaltern other as progenitor, producer, of knowledge about Islam, not to mention that translating dissent, that is, offering to a global audience non-canonical narratives about inheritance, marriage, and homosexuality in the Quran may be a tricky business for some Anglophone university presses, which may receive heavy donations from conservative rich countries like Saudi Arabia or Qatar. Yousef, born in 1966, is a distinguished professor of Arabic letters, gender studies, and applied Islamology at the University of Manouba in Tunisia. She did both her undergraduate and graduate education in the Tunisian State University system, not in Paris. She also served as director of Tunisia's National Library, Beit al-Hikma, before 2011 Tunisian Revolution, which catapulted the Middle East into a wave of uprisings that came to be known as the Arab Spring. The portrait of Olfa Yousef challenges the simplistic division in the Anglophone press and even academy that the divide in Tunisia of the post-revolution is between the Francophone, secular educated elite who admire France and the Arabophone poor masses who are attached to their Arabo-Islamic heritage. This is what you hear all the time in the American media and academic books. However, if you look at Olfa Yousef, she was born to parents who are teachers, and her mother is an Arabic teacher from the Zaytuna Mosque. So she's middle class, she's educated in Arabic, but all of Tunisians are Francophone besides being Arabophone. So we are from the same generation. Speaking French is not necessarily a status symbol during my generation at least. Yet neither her Arabic education nor expertise in Islamic studies has prevented her from defending the principle of secularism or the values of the republics. The new dichotomy found in the West between the secular Francophone elite and the Arabophone masses, if it reveals anything, it is the rise of a new school of liberal Orientalism in which neither the Arab language nor the Arab mind, on account of some undiagnosed cultural or genetic incompatibility, is incapable of producing secular thought. This is why the Islamist, or moderate Islamist, to use our American terminology, appears to be more glorified or more qualified, than the secular Muslim to speak about Islam. Arab secular scholars are seen either as minions of France or secular dictatorships, because Yousef is a Muslim feminist reformer who functions within a Franco-Arabic Islamic secular paradigm that is indebted both to Averroes and to Descartes. Monica Marx, for example, does not say a word about her work in her article on the Islamic feminism of Tunisia. It's not clear if it's out of oversight or ideological scotoma that she finishes all her Tunisian secular, that she dismisses all Tunisia's secular feminists as urban admirers of French-style secularism, quote, who see Ennahda women as unwitting agents of their own domination. Marx's erasure of Yousef's important scholarly contribution to the history of Islamic feminism seems to lend voice to what the Moroccan feminist Fatima Mernissi calls a famous statement that only the persecuted Muslim woman is interesting to the West, end quote. Besides Hayratu Muslima, she has published numerous books, over 10. I will mention only the most important. The first would be Narratives About Women in the Quran and the Sunnah, 1997, A Debate Between Lexicography and Linguistics, 1997, The Plurality of Meanings in the Quran, a study of the foundations of the multiplicity of meaning in language through the science of interpreting the Quran, Women, which is an ironical title, Women Are Weak in Mind and Religion, The Male is Not Like the Female on Gendered Identity, Desire, Spiritual and Psychological Dimensions of the Pillars of Islam, and two co-authored books, A Semiotic and Symbolic Study of Mahmoud al-Mas'adi's The Dam and Women and Memory. She even wrote in French, Le Coran au risque de la psychanalyse in 2007, which writes back to another important book in Maghrebi psychoanalytic studies, which is La psychanalyse à l'épreuve de l'islam by another Tunisian scholar. In the first, the Tunisian male scholar said it's difficult to apply psychoanalysis in the Muslim world, in the Muslim, and then she responds in the opposite way. Even the Quran can be subjected to the challenge of psychoanalysis. Shortly before the January 14th revolution, Tunisian rapper, and we studied him in my Arabic class, Tunisian rapper Psycho M denounced in his 2011 song Manipulation, Youssef's book Hayratul Muslima as a Zionist conspiracy that aimed at destroying the Islamic Ummah, which means the nation. And between 2011-2013, after the 2011 elections, which brought Islamists to power, Youssef became one of the most prominent voices against the Troika ruling. And she, on August 13, 2013, which coincides with Tunisian Women's National Day, government security forces unveiled a plot to assassinate her for her controversial views on homosexuality and Islam. To this day, Youssef lives under the protection of 2 security guards, and she teaches under the protection of the police in the classroom. And I would like, this is why I'm honoring her scholarly work. Now we go back to the verse that I put on the cover of the book. So I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the new things that she does as a scholar is apply both psychoanalysis. She uses Butler, she uses Lacan, she uses Saussure, and she uses all of the modern all modern literary scholarly methods to teach the Quran, to study the Quran. Nobody before her has ever done that. For instance, in my first translation of the verse was, "None knows its true meaning but God." And then I realized, after reading this again and again for 100 times as a translator, I said, there is no true meaning. That's not what the text says, because I've been conditioned to think that the true meaning is with God, that He has the original copy, the original meaning. Then I realized that even my translation was wrong. And I went back and I wrote, and then it is actually, none knows its interpretation but God, which is totally different. Meaning, even God interprets His own text. Even the original text of the Quran is lost to God Himself, which I think is a more powerful statement than only God has the original meaning of the Quran. Against the male-dominated explanations of the Quran, which many Muslims believe are divine truths, Youssef argues that the Quranic text neither condemns homosexuality nor endorses women's subordination in inheritance and marriage. Rather than being the offshoot of medieval Islamic exegesis, Youssef argues that the homophobia we see today is a modern phenomenon and a contemporary discursive production. It became worse, actually, when the Arab Spring started. For her, medieval Muslim scholars, despite their shortcomings, were more open in their interpretation of sacred texts than modern-day Muslim clerics and televangelists. It's the Quran's openness to interpretation, she argues, that makes the Quranic text appropriate for any time and place, as opposed to the fallible and time and space-bound human readings of Muslim religious scholars. For these are not only subjective, but also tied, quote, to the affiliations, historical context, and psychological complexes of those who hold them, end quote. In each chapter, the author's perplexity arises from the discrepancies between what she calls the openness of the Quranic text and the interpretations and the closed readings of Muslim commentators, who often substitute their own human readings for God's words. Focusing on medieval scholarly debates on various aspects of marriage, inheritance, and homosexuality, she demonstrates that the hadiths, which are statements attributed to Muhammad, rather than the Quran, have formed the basis of the Sharia law, meaning the legal laws that are different from one country to another. At times, when male privilege is at stake, especially in matters of inheritance and marriage, the male Muslim scholars ignored the Quranic text and used human consensus to silence the clear rulings of the Quranic text. Standing against the hegemonic interpretive framework that gives each verse in the Quran one meaning and therefore one translation, she argues that her purpose in this book is not to find out the true meaning of the Quran, but to show its plurality of meanings, anchoring her pluralistic interpretive and translational framework in the Quranic text itself. In the opening pages of her book, she inserts the following verse: "No one knows its interpretation but God." I'm going to give you different readings of different verses as they have been translated into English and as I have translated them. And I would like to talk about the act of translation is actually a double translation, perhaps a double invention. The first translation of invention is from the Quranic text into modern Arabic. That also is gendered according to who is interpreting it into modern terms. And sometimes we see male scholars putting their words between brackets as if they're explaining to us what God is saying, even though in the Arabic text they don't exist at all. And also my own translation from this feminist reading in Arabic into English. So I am also, the translator becomes also an inventor, very much like like Benyoussef. I have made my translation not only translation from Arabic into English, but also from a feminist reading of the Quranic text into English. So this is why I call it a double translation. So in this one, let's look at this. We the prophets, so this is a hadith, statement attributed to Muhammad. We the prophets are not a folk to give as inheritance what we left behind as charity. According to Yusuf, there are two meanings to this. Either we the prophets do not give any inheritance, all we leave behind is charity. Second explanation, the hadith does not mean forbidding the inheritance of prophets, but forbidding inheriting what they left behind from their wealth as charity. And other than that, they can be inherited. So it's all about interpretation. The other one, so if we look at what we have left behind as charity is not to be inherited. So this is my translation of that hadith. As opposed to the Androcentric mainstream translation in English, Allah's apostle said, our property will not be inherited. Whatever we, that is the prophets, leave is sadaqah, is charity. There is total difference in the way you interpret it, you interpret the hadith in Arabic, and also how you translate it. Another important problem that we have, an issue that there is always dissent over what it means, what the text or hadith means. This is from the Quran. So this is about the dowry. Okay? So to the women, give sidaq, dowry, as a gift. It's not a command, according to Yusuf, to give them a dowry. Rather, sidaq is a donation without expecting anything in return. And she found some old text where, people recite poetry as a dowry, or they sing as a dowry, not necessarily money. It's not a fundamental prerequisite of marriage, as Ben Ashur or Francophone Tunisian sociologist Munira Sharad has argued. So even the women buy into these male interpretations, meaning, so if I pay you money to marry you, so you become my property. There is a big difference between giving money to marry somebody, so it's like you are buying a wife, versus reciting poetry or singing out of. There is the implications are huge. So this is Mohsin Khan's translation in English. And give to the women whom you marry their mahar. And he gives obligatory bridal money given by the husband to his wife and at the time of marriage. There is nothing obligatory about it in the Quranic text, but this is the practices, and they present it as something ordained by God with a good heart. But if they of their own good pleasure, remit any part of it to you, take it and enjoy it without fear of any harm, as Allah has made it lawful. And to this, Yusuf responds, if prerequisites and possibilities become equal, the Almighty God's statement during fasting permitted to you is sex with your wife on the night of fasting would mean that the husband is required to have sex with his wife on the night of fasting, which is ridiculous, of course. Another famous mistranslation is the use of enna. Okay? Your wives, this is a famous verse that people use to say that women are property in Islam. Your wives are a tilth for you, so go to your tilth and have sex with them, with your wives, in any manner as long as it is in the vagina and not in the anus. Okay? When or how you will, and send good deeds or ask Allah to bestow upon you pious offspring before you for your own selves. So this is Mohsin Khan's male translation of this text, and you could see he is explaining to the English speaker, especially to other Muslims who do not speak Arabic, where you should have sex, which is not in the Arabic text at all. Translating the adverbial expression anna, it's an adverbial expression of time and manner, which means wherever or whenever, is different from translating it as aina, which means where. Okay, so grammatical books show that this adverbial expression is related to manner, how, however, and also to time. It is not where God ordained you. That is the mistranslation in English. She says this verse is usually used to justify women's treatment as a sex object, as seen in the translation of Mohsin Khan. The verse is not about where God asks you to have sex, but it's about sexual positions. It legitimizes different sexual positions in intercourse without any time restriction. And again, did the God in the Quran talk about sexual positions? I do not know. Only God knows its interpretation. My retranslation of this verse was, of course, along the lines of Benyoussef. Your women are a tilth for you, so go to your tilth, however, and whenever you wish. So you could see that this is what I mean by the double translation as a double invention, from Quranic Arabic to Arabic, from that feminist Arabic reading into English. The same thing applies to bisexuality. For a long time, especially after the terrorist attack in Florida, it happened because of Islam. It happens because the guy is a Muslim, but nobody really considered that the guy was suffering from self-hatred. In the Quran, actually, we have only one word that people use to say that the Quran forbids sexuality. It's the fahisha. But the word fahisha, was something bad. It doesn't necessarily mean same-sex love, same-sex relations. There is only one word that also they use to mean sodomy, which is liwat. But liwat is just it's a reference to the people of Lot. It doesn't necessarily mean even homosexuality. So let's look at her rereading of this verse. O mankind, we created you from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another. The most righteous among you is the noblest in the sight of God. God is all omniscient and knowing. Benyoussef says that the structure of this word is not about the biological difference between men and women, but it is also about connectedness. It's about duality that exists within one person. It is not between men and women. It's not about, it's the division of connectedness, not of separateness. The other word, so we have the liwat, that's the word that we find in the Quran. that people think is about homosexuality, but it just means the people pollute, and people make adjectives out of it. And Lord said to his people, you commit an abomination that no one in the world has ever done before. You lust after men and commit robbery on highways and evil in your meetings. There is a big difference between modern interpreters and between medieval interpreters. In Middle Ages, Muslim scholars, when we look at their commentaries, they said because they were, they raped the guests, Lot's guests. They had sex with them. It's not homosexuality, but it is rape. The fahisha means rape. It doesn't mean versus now, automatically, they jump to the conclusion that it is homosexuality. In other verses, you can see, she has gone to the Quran and looked at all the references to Liwat and the people of Lot. In another verse, do you lust after men of all people and leave your wives, which God created for you? Surely transgressing people you are. So, what would be then the transgression? Is it because you prefer men to women that God has given you? Or perhaps it's when you chose someone else, or is it perhaps because you are making another man the object of your love, which at that time was not accepted for a man to be put in the feminine position and to be lesser than a man. So she totally flips that verse around. And Lot said to his people, how could you knowingly commit such an abomination? You lust after men and not women. Surely an ignorant people you are. So it's not about homosexuality. It's not. It's about putting men, it's about leaving women for men, which is totally different. Maybe the worst thing for a man would be that he is compared to a woman. And she uses these to talk about the patriarchal mindset of the time. Because last day, being put, it's like loving another man would be belonging to, it would be undermining the hierarchical system in society, which is the system of domination where you find men at the top and women at the bottom. So having same-sex relations would put a hierarchy between men themselves, which is not something that they would accept at the time. It's a new reading even for me. So in the conclusion of her book, she states that what medieval Muslim scholars have, condemned is rape, not homosexuality, because it was well practiced at that time. When the talk about, the word homophobia that exists today in the phenomenon of heterophobia that we have in the Muslim world today actually did not exist until the colonial encounter in the 19th century. There were no laws forbidding same-sex marriage until the French and the English came to the Middle East and introduced the laws criminalizing same-sex relations. The first law criminalizing same-sex relations in Tunisia was introduced by the French in 1912. And we kept it since 1912. And now when the Islamists came into power, they are defending that French law as a symbol of their Arabo-Islamic identity. And this is the irony of all of this. When the French came in the 19th century, they looked at, people have gay relationships all over the Middle East, and they saw homosexuality, they called it the Eastern disease or the malady of Islam, and they explained homosexuality by Islam's segregation of the sexes. After the Orlando shooting, Islamophobia is also seen as a one-to-one correspondence with the teachings of Islam. So you could see in the 19th century, Islam is the cause of homosexuality. In the 21st century, homophobia or violence against gay people is also the consequence of the direct consequence of Islam. So there is something that's not right in our easy explanations. I have also reflected upon, my journey as a translator in this. And my reflections, I published them in an article on translation and globalization, recently just came out, where I reflect about my journey, translating this book in particular. The first thing I noticed is, at first I thought I was translating the first book of Benyoussef into English. And then I realized that this is the first book ever written by a Muslim woman in Arabic and in a field of Islamic studies that gets translated into English. I didn't know that. Even when I sent it to publishers, I assumed that, that many other, and then I realized even Fatima Mernissi, who is the famous Muslim scholar, the only reason why they published her books in English is because she wrote them originally in French. And the assumption is that Muslim women who speak Arabic have nothing to contribute or are not knowledgeable about Islam. And there is a bias even in the publishing industry. If it's a book written by a Muslim man, they will translate about Islam. But if it's if we can think about translation as a homosexual enterprise with a double M, meaning between men, between meaning it's about if you look at the field of Islamic studies, you are translating brown men the work of brown men for white men in the field of Islamic studies. You write about Muslim women, but they are not the subject. They are always the object of discourse. They are not the subject of any discourse on Islam. And I didn't know that when I started working on this. It's just all of these, hundreds of rejections from major presses that made me go into the website of these publishers, and I looked into all the important presses in Islamic studies, and I made a study in this, and I made an article in this article where I look at all their publications from 2000 until 2016, how many works by Muslim women scholars in the field of Islamic study they have translated from Arabic. 0. Harvard, Texas, all of them, none. The first one, I realized it's not the first book in Islamic studies is actually The Perplexity of the Muslim Woman, and I had no clue until I started working on this translation. Conclusion. My translation of Benyoussef's scholarship has brought to the center the role of translation in mediating political intervention, effecting social change, and creating solidarity networks among protest groups within and outside the Muslim and Arabic-speaking world. I'm also concurring with Munya Bakar's view that the act of translation is one of the integral elements of the revolutionary project. Not translating is a form of censorship. Thank you for your attention.
Questions at this time?
Yes. She was so happy. So I contacted her in summer 2012, and she said, "Yeah, go ahead. I'm so excited, that." And then 2 years later, she said, "Oh, by the way, what happened to that?" And I said, "Rejection." Every time she said rejection. In the end, I gave up. There was a year in 2014 that I gave up, and then I sent my prospectus to Dr. Bill Carter in who is the big translator of Proust at UAB, and I said, Bill, can you please give me some comment? What's wrong with the prospect? And he said, it's outstanding. There is nothing wrong with it. It's not having a publisher doesn't mean that your work is bad. It's just not in their line. It's not in their. They always have a plan, and they look for works that fit into. Keep sending it. And in the MISA conference 2015, like an agent from Lexington Books sent me an email. Do you have anything new in North African studies? That we have opened a new section about translation. If you have anything, please let's meet at MISA conference. That's how it happened. Yes.
Lives and works under the presence of armed robbers.
Yes.
After Lou's translation, have you yourself been subject to any negative reaction because of what you've done?
There are different ways of reacting. So here is silence. To this day, not a single review came out. Recently, last week, somebody, I think somebody from Pakistan, she's a graduate student, she read it and she's excited. She said she's writing a review. And I knew it will only be a Muslim female student who would write any review if it ever gets published. So, and I had to go to these networks and please, can anybody write a review about my book? That's the censorship. You can either you can either, kill the author, the translator, or you kill them by not mentioning their work, which is what happened to me.
And when did the book come out?
It came out March 2017. Yeah. Usually, if you have other books, like Unveiling Islam, within 3 weeks you will have a review, not this book. So I'm hoping, I'm just publicizing the book in different networks. Please find somebody to review it.
Can you please tell me, thank you.